Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Swayamsita Samal, and I am a research assistant at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. It is a matter of great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all to another edition of the ICS Wednesday seminar titled Manufacturing Ambitions Minus Chinese Investments, Smartphone Companies in India and the Indianization Phase. The electronics industry, especially smartphones, has witnessed the biggest expansion of Chinese investment since 2014 in an adverse and competing geography like India. Four of the top five best-selling smartphone brands at the end of 2023 are Chinese, with a combined market share of 50%. Over the years, the companies have scaled up their operations in India, widened their reach, and become easy points of reference for consumers. However, the violence in Galwan Valley in the summer of 2020 has had a significant impact on the companies. There is increased regulatory scrutiny over them, and the Indian government has sought to localize or Indianize their operations and management. This presentation will examine the expansion and operations of Chinese smartphone companies in India and explore different measures undertaken in the process of Indianization. The talk will further address whether India's manufacturing ambitions can proceed by discounting Chinese investments. The speaker for today's seminar is Dr. Anand P. Krishnan. He is a fellow at the Center of Excellence for Himalayan Studies, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Shiv Nadar Institution of Eminence, Delhi National Capital Region, and an Adjunct Fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. He is also the assistant editor of the China Report Journal. His research interests lie in industrial development in the global south, labor relations in China and India, supply chains, and state society relations. The chair for today's seminar is Mr. Ravi Bhutalingam. He is an emeritus fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, London. He is also the founder and chairman of Manas Advisory, which focuses on top management coaching and integrating psychological science with on ground management experience. Mr. Bhutalingam has received specialized training in psycholinguistics, scientific methods, and Chinese culture under the mentorship of renowned scientist and sinologist Joseph Needham. He has served in several positions in various industrial groups and conglomerates. His research interests lie in the Chinese economy, history, and Confucianism. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to ask all participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants shall be muted during the seminar. Questions with your name and affiliation may be posted in the chat box. Alternatively, you may use the raise your hand option during the interactive session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself. Thank you. I now hand it over to the chair. Over to you, Mr. Bhutalingam. Thank you.
Thank you, Swayamsita, and good afternoon to all of you for this very interesting episode in the ICS Wednesday seminar series. It's a great pleasure to have Dr. Anand Krishnan with us, and the subject that he has chosen is especially topical and contemporary today. The reason is that whether India should entertain increased Chinese investment, and if so, in what fields, is a subject of very hot debate right now in India. This has been triggered off by the recent economic survey presented in July by the Chief Economic Advisor, which actually advocated opening up to Chinese investments with the argument that if we do so, we could reduce the number of imports from China, which is today creating a huge bilateral trade deficit with China. And not only could we reduce the imports, but through manufacturing in India with Chinese investment, we could create jobs and over a period of time, add value in India, create further jobs and create exports, thus leading to a virtual cycle. But on the other hand, there are worries about security. There are worries about possible effects on Indian producers. So the question has still not been resolved, and even within the government, there appear to be several points of view. So, where do we go from here? To take us through this maze, this is what Dr. Krishnan is going to navigate for us today, and I'm sure it is going to be a very interesting journey as he takes us through. Everybody will have a lot of questions. So I would just repeat that between the chat box and the raised hand option, in order to have a sense of equity, what I propose to do is take the questions in the chat box first and then come to the raised hands, if any. Thank you very much. And over to you, Anand.
Thank you, Mr. Bootlingam, for that brief intro. So my presentation is, as Mr. Bootlingam has indicated, is going to be based on two papers. And I am, at the outset, let me be candid enough to say that I'm going to largely talk about smartphone companies only. The fact that what Mr. Bootlingam just mentioned about Chinese investments in India are now in different segments and different sectors. Of course, there is the overall general narrative on whether the investments are needed or not needed. That is the larger debate. But different sectors have different norms and different aspects and different narratives for each specific sector on where China is as investments have been there in India. So I am going to be this. So this presentation is largely going to be only be focused on smartphone companies, and so it's going to be looking at even if it is going to be asking about how investments from China should be in India, it will be from that particular perspective. So this is essentially a presentation which is going to be of two parts. I'll first look at the first part will look at the growth and evolution of Chinese smartphone companies in India, what makes them successful, how have they survived, what has been the essence of their longevity, and how they have become easy references for consumers. And in the second part, I look at the environment post 2020 and Galwan, and how that increasing scrutiny, toughening environment, and the quote unquote indigenization, how that has had an effect on smartphone companies from China. This presentation is essentially a combination of two papers. One is now in a completed form. It is a part of the next iteration of the Council for Social and Economic Progress's China and South Asia project, which is expected to be released sometime early next year. And the other is for a conference at the end of the year. So for the second part, which is largely on the Indianization bit, any comments or feedback from the audience will also be very helpful. Okay, so where do we begin the story of smartphone companies from China in India? Or rather, how do we begin this story? There are various ways, but I think one of the ways which I would like to start off or pitch is with regarding something close to a lot of Indians, and including me, and that's the game of cricket. So the Board of Cricket Control for Cricket in India decided to shift the Indian Premier League to the United Arab Emirates in September and November 2020. Some of you remember during the tough COVID control measures, and that was not possible or feasible for the tournament to be held in India, so they decided to move it to the United Arab Emirates. However, in the run-up to the tournament, the title sponsor Vivo India suspended its commitment following the backlash of against Chinese companies post Galwan. In fact, it was in 2018 that Vivo had inked a 5-year deal with the BCCI for title sponsorship of the IPL, which comes to about 2,199 crores, which is approximately 341 million US dollars. In fact, even before before Vivo inked this partnership, Oppo, another company, had become the lead sponsor of the Indian cricket team itself, both across both male and female. And it was for a 5-year deal of over 1,079 crore, which is about 162 million. Now, the question what it leads to, or why the point I am raising about this is, why would Chinese mobile companies insert themselves into such an important entity of Indian popular culture. And I would say that this is not just due to commercial interests or profit maximization. It is also a way to overcome cultural barriers and general trust deficit that undergirds bilateral relations between India and China. Uh, these sponsorship, I would argue, have expanded the company's visibility, scaled up their operations, and has helped in capturing consumers' imagination and helping these companies to stay one step ahead of competing rivals. Uh, Before their entry into India, these brands had developed their own niche within China, and then they had gradually scaled up. This also comes from the experience of China being a critical component of supply chains of global electronic brands and corporations over the years, once they decided to shift their production offshore. That experience and that being part of that network helped Chinese companies also gain expertise, sophistication, and technological know-how to develop their own companies and their brands. The big game changer in this was the transition from 2G to 3G handsets that propelled the rise of smartphones and its sophisticated technologies. So domestic brands like Xiaomi, Lenovo, Coolpad, Huawei, and ZTE all gained footholds in the Chinese market, and which have gradually expanded more and more. And in fact, with the later iterations of technology like the 4G and 5G, these have only increased further. But the other big benefit was because the Indian consumers were one of the largest users of phones with the Android operating system platform. As of 2022, that market share was almost 95%, and today it's roughly about 70%. If you have to denote a certain year on which Chinese smartphone handset companies came to India, we should say it will be the year 2014. And that is also interestingly coincides with the change of government in India with the general elections. The entry of smartphone, these brands and these companies also has to be seen in the larger context of marked increase in Chinese outbound investments across the world between 2013 and 2016. It really doubles to almost 200 billion USD. So as Swamsida in her intro said, among the top 5 brands of smartphones which are selling in India at the end of 2023, according to the International Data Corporation's Worldwide Economic Quarterly Mobile Phone Tracker, four out of the 5 are Chinese, and they have a combined market share of over 50%. While there are many companies, but I think the 2 main ones or the brands are actually Xiaomi and BBK Electronics. In fact, Xiaomi makes the first entry with the launch of its model MI3 in partnership with Flipkart. If some of you remember, there were lots. I mean, that this is the year 2015, and there is great amount of anticipation for this phone. And in fact, they tied up with Flipkart. The people who had pre-registered on the site was close to 2 lakh, and the site had crashed, and then it had to be revived again. So such was the anticipation among the consumers to get to this model or get to lay hands on this model, that kind of informs this number of registrations and the anticipation. So Xiaomi begins by shipping devices from China before then gradually moving on to third-party contract manufacturing and assembling them within India. So the facilities in south, in north of the country. Later, they move on to open up exclusive retail stores and authorized franchisees across the country with special emphasis on rural areas. The other big player is BBK Electronics. It's the other trailblazer, headquartered in Shenzhen, and it has 2 main brands, which is Oppo and Vivo. These are separate companies with the same parent organization or firm, but they are in fierce competition with each other, both within and outside India. And these 2 brands also have other subsidiary brands. You can name it as Realme, OnePlus, iQOO. All of them are available in India today. So by having these sub-brands, what they are able to do is these companies are able to diversify the business portfolios and maximize their reach among consumers. Now, one of the critical points for the rise and growth of these companies in India has been the support of the government over the last decade, and which has also coincided with India's Make in India ambitions and the ambitions to attain self-sufficiency. And electronics sector has been identified as one of the significant areas. So the Chinese smartphone companies, while balancing themselves in such geopolitical calculations, have also had incentives to move to India in the long term. I mean, this is largely due to the overcapacity in manufacturing within the country and also the saturation of the domestic market, along with new players coming in that leads to rise in competition. And that forces the companies to actually look outwards. The sheer size of the market, along with a growing consumer base who are actually looking forward to savoring the digital space, was also proving to be alluring to the companies. One of the big important areas where these companies based themselves was the Delhi National Capital Region, and this became a prominent space for all major Chinese players. So in fact, if you look at all the three brands, whether it's Xiaomi, Oppo, or Vivo, they are involved in the Delhi NCR area. That is primarily due to the fact that these companies and they require state-of-the-art facilities which need wide spaces, and so the availability of land is a key concern. Among them, other infrastructural issues like uninterrupted power supply to run these facilities, which are basically surface mounting, assembling, durability testing, are process which have to be in a purpose-built environment for such sleek and sophisticated precision devices. On top of that, combined with this is infrastructure connectivity for transportation to maintain the supply lines, and so the location becomes all the more pertinent, which all makes the NCR as a suitable locations where different state governments in and around it have been keen to facilitate the ease of doing business. And even within NCR, Greater Noida, the place where I am located right now, is gaining prominence as a has gained prominence as a stable and suitable locations, with the state government of Uttar Pradesh itself pulling out all stops to house these facilities. Not only do these the fact for the state governments, it's not only the fact of generation of skilled employment and development of local economy, but the companies also participate in various corporate social responsibility programs under their CSR portfolio. So for instance, Oppo in recent years has taken a lead in initiatives to empower small and medium enterprises to strengthen local supply chains. They are also involved in programs of skill development for youth. And leveraging on all these successes, the brand has also moved on to cooperation agreements with strategic agencies like the ISRO on satellite navigation, something which had created a lot of furor among the opposition a couple of years ago. So apart from the critical component of support from the government, the other aspect in which the companies are also on lookout to navigate such a tough environment or a difficult environment in India is through interest groups or local interest groups to act as some kind of a connecting cord. So all these companies are actually part of the India Cellular and Electronics Association, which is the apex body for mobile electronics industry, which comprises manufacturers, brand owners, technology providers, solution providers, distributors, retail chains. So this is the one-stop agency or group of which represents all these diverse players in this smartphone ecosystem. So the ICEA, or the Indian Cellular Electronics Association, their own interface with the government has been to ease controls and ensure smooth functioning of the companies. So whether that is in terms of advocating the easing of visa restrictions for technicians from China or reducing import tariffs, some of which found success with the union budget this time, which announced reduction of custom duties on mobiles and components by almost 15%. So even when Galwan happened, the ICEA did throw its weight behind the Chinese companies and their products and taking strong stand against any incidents of vandalism. I would also argue that to understand and explain the company's longevity in India, I think the most important component that one needs to look at is the sales and marketing. In fact, the study of this will give a better picture on how the companies have evolved, have outlasted phases of turbulence, which is the default setting in India-China bilateral relations. So to quote from a informal conversation I had with a mid-level sales executive with Samsung Electronics for the North Indian region a few years ago, I quote him. He says, "It has been very difficult. We are struggling to compete with the blitz of Oppo and Vivo. Their penetration and style of marketing is almost difficult to match." Now, these words echo how the companies or these brands have put themselves in an adversarial ecosystem. And in such an adversarial ecosystem, the test for endurance and longevity lies or depends in capturing the attention of customers, capture eyeballs literally, and gradually build a dedicated clientele. So in spite of, as I said, about animosity and mistrust between the governments and even people as a default setting, so what explains the favorable attitude of the Indian consumer for Chinese smartphones? So this actually lies in the fact that consumers generally appreciate the superior quality of foreign products, and they believe that possessing these products will provide them with a cosmopolitan identity, or rather they are also part of this global consumer, and they are also able to get or are in possession of global products. And that somehow then also this then rather informs smartphone preferences. So people choose smartphones for various reasons. So some go for features, some go for applications, some are just purely looking at pricing, so on and so forth. And so keeping all this in mind, the Chinese brands have developed a multi-pronged approach in sales and marketing to ensure that they have the maximum reach within people. So among this multi-pronged, one way is to look or create sub-brands which have special features at certain lesser prices than big brands is one among the strategy. And this is also to cater to newer demographics. I mean, especially young people who are actually into maybe into smartphones for their features of camera and other applications. So cater to that kind of a clientele. It also helps that a lot of Indians are also buying their second phones. And so while the companies or the brands do realize that the first phones may not necessarily be one of their brand. So people generally, if you are looking at, say, a Samsung or an Apple, if they want a second phone, that is somewhere the Chinese brands are also calculating and are able to pitch themselves to become the second brand of or choice for people looking for a second device. And that also helps in the companies to also modulate themselves or pitch themselves further to cater to diverse needs and choices. And that is a sub brand strategy. The second is customer segmentation, which is to identify and curate brands and models for customers with diverse tastes, which kind of follows up from the sub-brands itself. The other way in which the companies have been able to market themselves well has been the change in the FDI policy in the country, where 100% FDI was allowed. It facilitated the companies to open exclusive retail stores. So the brands directly got themselves involved in sales rather than remaining dependent on stores selling products of multiple rival brands. Further, these exclusive stores also, through these stores, the companies were also able to showcase their entire range of products under one roof. In fact, significantly, the expansion of the Chinese brands, as I said from the quote of that Samsung executive, is that a lot of these have expanded beyond India's metropolitan areas. And that is largely been due to data penetration and expansion of 4G footprint of service providers, and the way in which the Chinese brands have helped is through e-commerce platforms where they have working arrangements to take and for the sale of their products. So they are also have arrangements with retail chains like Reliance. The other way in which, while retaining and building their exclusive stores, they have not left out the normal retailer who does sell multiple brands of phone in his or her shop. So they provide, at least in the beginning of their operations, at least in the 3 to 4 years in the beginning, since their entry into India, they started providing higher margins for retailers. So compared to the standard 8%, it would be close to about 11 to anywhere between 11 to 18%. And that helps them keep to ensure that their models are visible in the non-exclusive stores, and that the retailers are also able to talk more about their products to potential buyers. So what this also shows is that the retailers are very highly valued, and as they become very critical nodes in connecting with consumers especially in peri-urban and semi-urban geographies. In fact, there is a lot of effort put in by the companies to actually provide the retailers with a sense of belonging. So they are made part of promotional incentives, they're given periodic rebates. And from time to time, the retailers are also invited to visit manufacturing facilities, thus thereby showing close relationship, nurturing this relationship, and also in a way continuing to win their confidence altogether. The other key aspect which I feel is also important for the longevity is the other part of sales, which is advertising, or other part of sales or marketing, which is advertising. Outdoor advertising through smart partnerships with agencies. So for instance, if you have taken a look at metro services in Delhi, Mumbai, and Gurgaon, there have been branding of train coaches and platforms, and even completely sponsoring select stations. That gives visibility to the brand. The very name of brand across also gives eyeballs. You also have in-the-face hoardings. I mean, to the point that at one point after their entry, almost in the beginning years, that also was subject of a lot of memes by the fact that everywhere you turn around, you're only looking at Chinese mobile brands. The other, of course, as I said in the beginning, is to hitch their fortunes to pop culture. So cricket and cinema through sponsorship, getting on board celebrities, brand ambassadors to endorse their projects to such an extent that they're now also involving social media influencers and YouTubers to market their niche products. The other aspect of advertising is also, if you look at their advertising of whether it is Oppo, whether it is Vivo, they are creating customized advertisements which are packaged with the right doses of emotions and also have a sense of occasion to sentimentally touch the common man. So if you look at the advertisements during Deepavali, there was a campaign of by Vivo with the hashtag no phone, which was basically to say that you remove the phone and spend quality time with your family, taking care of old and loved ones. So this smart packaging, this emotional packaging also helps brands in terms of establishing connect. In fact, this is what to refer to Xi Jinping's words on building positive narrative on China is to actually the part of telling stories well, or tell the stories well. Thus underlining the care in the relationship between the brand and the consumer. In turn, this leaves a positive effect and helps the brand's longevity, making them easy reference points. So far, so good. But till 2020, while there has been turbulence, mistrust, and geopolitical competition, which is a norm between India and China, and there has been episodic incursions across the LAC, the period from say 2014 till 2020 was relatively quiet for these companies. I mean, they were not weighed down by all the default setting in India-China relationship. Their marketing and business transactions proceeded without much of a hindrance, apart from some occasional issue. Most of them had a very smooth sailing. So the summer of 2020 and the happenings in Galwan presents perhaps the biggest challenge for the Chinese companies. There are genuine apprehensions and anxieties of the companies. It begins with the shrill rhetoric of boycotting Chinese goods, which intersects with vocal for local campaign of the government. Uh, at that period, you also see occasional attacks on stores selling devices, which have then further moved on with the central government itself tightening screws and increasing scrutiny. So you, for the last few years, you have seen punitive action in terms of suspicion of tax evasion, money laundering, illegal foreign remittances. In fact, yesterday there was a report where uh, the ED has put Vivo India in the dock, saying that they have pushed their money outside India, and it is Vivo China rather than which is controlling their operations. Parallelly, while putting in these measures, the government has also there has been efforts to actually localize or Indianize operations and management. Of course, this is also somewhere borrowing from China's own model of development of these companies. So there have been series of measures which have been proposed. So one of them is to seek induction of Indian equity partners in local operations. They want Indian executives to top roles to be appointed in the management. Indian contract manufacturers to be promoted or involved in production and assembly. So the emergence of Tata Electronics is a good example to that. And in fact, this is also in line with developing the homegrown manufacturers or third-party manufacturers or the supplier network is also how the Chinese themselves have built up their suppliers of high-precision devices and how these suppliers are also moving to newer locations such as Southeast Asia. The other, of course, aspect is what the government also wants to expand exports from India. So it's not just about the domestic market, but also that all these brands also help in expanding exports to newer markets. Some of the brands, at least Vivo has been in the forefront to do that, especially to the Middle East and also some parts of Africa. And the other way is to also hire local distributors. So that is the localization or what you call Indianization of the operation. The emphasis thus is to have domestic value addition and create a robust network of indigenous manufacturers of sophisticated precision devices in the long term. As I said, this mirrors how China has developed its own homegrown supply companies, which are now expanded the operations into East Asia. So how have the companies generally responded to these measures? They have been forced in reality to walk a tightrope walk. The initial days of the standoff in 2020, they took a mix of steps. They went slow on their promotional activities, toned down on high-pitched celebrity advertisements, and also started amplifying the Make in India narrative by ensuring that how all their products through their manufacturing in India or through their assembly in India is actually to ensure that how these companies are themselves invested in powering the country's operations. In fact, if you look at Vivo's yearly reports, this Make in India aspect has been repeated ad nauseum. So gradually there has been some compliance with a few of the directives. From April this year, both Oppo and Vivo have begun to bring in Indian distributors in place of Chinese, especially starting with the North Indian region. This replaces distributors who were previously until recently Chinese in each state and ensures that it is the headquarters of the Indian arm of these companies that now builds local distributors. Other way is to also introduce separate sales and marketing operations for each individual brand of the BBK group, for at least for the BBK group. So Oppo, Realme, and OnePlus, whose all revenues were accounted under the books of together in the books of Oppo, has now started to have separate accounts and marketing operations. And the other thing is gradually they have also started partnering with domestic manufacturers for production, which is also would be helpful for them to claim benefits of government's production-linked incentives. Interestingly, there has been no Chinese company, at least in the electronic sector, which has made use of the PLI, which was introduced by the government way back in 2020. So what I would say is that while these are some of the steps which the government has taken, but these are mostly towards the long term. I mean, in the short and medium term, there are a lot of constraints and limitations. The primary thing is the heavy dependence on China, especially with the fact that China's dominance of global supply chains across categories. So for electrical components which go into a smartphone, say the printed circuit boards, integrated circuits, advanced displays, diodes, capacitors, batteries, camera modules, these are all, in fact, there is very few alternatives other than China for these components. So according to Ministry of Commerce's figures itself, in financial year 23-24, out of the 34.4 billion imports in electronics, uh, uh, there was a combined 18 billion, which was only from China and Hong Kong. To reduce this dependence, there has been promotion of, or at least more efforts being put in to get investments from other, or look at other alternative areas or firms. So Taiwanese electronics manufacturers firm are increasingly being wooed. But however, the scale at which that is being done is still quite less compared to what China is. And frankly, the system and this supply chains with the Chinese are far more robust and far more dense. And clearly, as I said, this also requires looking at things in the long term. In fact, if India really requires, I mean, to manufacture smartphone components or manufacturing, for instance, one smartphone right from its component, including all its components, and also create a good, robust supplier network, requires a lot of things to be done. So it requires development of ancillary industries, clusters, uninterrupted power and water supply, better working and living conditions for the workforce, which I would like to underline. And unfortunately, none of these are under India's possession at such a scale at this moment. Also, having JVs is a good thought, or joint ventures is a good thought, but one is unsure whether the Chinese companies are actually forthcoming with sharing technologies in such partnerships. And especially the effort has been to reduce the Chinese partnership to below 50%, so that the Indian partner has more of majority of shares. In such an arrangement, the Chinese companies are actually very reluctant to share technology. So that is definitely constrained. So while agencies and while groups like the Confederation of Indian Industry is asking for more support from the government to increase domestic value additions in the electronics industry, but parallelly, they have also sought a non-restrictive approach towards investments, component imports, technology transfer, and facilitate the movement of skilled manpower from competing economies. So clearly there has been a balance which is sought to be driven. And clearly what they are also looking at is that India's FDI policy, which was actually tweaked in 2020 to bar the Chinese companies from coming from the automatic route, is sought to be relooked by at least groups like the CII. Even if you look at the other part of what the challenge with Indianization, which might not entirely work, at least in the short to medium term, also comes from the fact of increasing push by ministry itself, especially Ministry of Commerce and Industry and Ministry of Electronics, to actually ease norms of Chinese technicians to come to India, because they know they are only those people have the technological know-how of operating machinery and other technology. So clearly there is what is being looked at is a delicate or what will happen or what would be needed would only be a delicate balance between developing homegrown players and also the fact that there needs to be more allowance for Chinese investments, and especially in the electronics industry. So where does this all leave leave the companies itself. I mean, there has been tightening of news. The brands are facing one of the most toughest times in their life in India. But and there is apparently we have also seen with Apple shifting its manufacturing and phones now being produced in India. The clamor, there has been a rise in population who want to produce want to get those products. So while there's a growing clientele for both companies like brands like Apple and Samsung, the Chinese brands have withstood that challenge. In fact, if you look at the first quarter of this year, uh, Chinese brands have a combined share of close to 75% in the 5G device market. So these steady figures they have been able to maintain every quarter, so on and so forth. So, so finally, what I wish to say is what this shows is the adaptability of the companies to survive, evolve, and outlast phases of surveillance, of turbulence, pardon, and how they have been able to do it is also by constantly being able to retain the confidence of the consumers. The consumers have not jettisoned the Chinese brands despite all the rhetoric. In fact, the sales figures also show that these brands continue to hold fort. In fact, what's more, there are new Chinese smartphones on the horizon who have dominated markets elsewhere, are now looking at India as the next destination. I mean, a ready example for that is Transsion. So clearly, the promise and potential of Indian market, its size, encourages this longevity of the Chinese companies, and they are prepared to ride this turbulent phase and prepare for the long haul. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anand. That was really extremely cogent and very comprehensive survey, right from the start of the Chinese smartphone industry into India, their evolution, and how they have adjusted to some very challenging circumstances. Before I open the house to questions, it's too tempting, and I'm going to give in to that temptation to ask you the first question, but I promise I will stop with a question. From what you have narrated, Anand, the story seems extraordinarily favorable to the Chinese smartphone industry from what it appears. The customers are happy with the quality of the phones and the pricing. As you say, the retailer and trade channel is happy because they are getting good margins and there has been some Indianization of the trade channels. Even in terms of the government, in terms of the localization, in terms of the expanded manufacture through third-party contracts, more value addition in India, a certain amount of exports, the Chinese smartphones seem to be moving exactly in the direction that government policy has mandated. As far as security is concerned, very important, although these firms have been charged with some financial issues of taxation, tax evasion, money laundering, and FEMA, foreign exchange, there has not, to my understanding, been any suspicion of any tampering with the devices, malware, etc. And certainly not any exploding phones or exploding pages like recently in Lebanon. And no country has really claimed who has done that, actually, incidentally. My question is, apart from a generalized antipathy to China because of the current circumstances, what is the key problem here in terms of proceeding in this manner? And even technology sharing, what they're asking for is nothing different from the global norm. People generally insist on 50% plus if they are going to share cutting edge technology. So I'll stop there. So where is the problem?
I believe the problem is more in terms of the fact that you don't have alternate Indian brands to actually match with the Chinese brands. I mean, so if you look at all the figures of the top selling phones in India, for instance, there is not an Indian brand out there. And that somehow seems to be an issue with, at least in terms of policy, and fact that every phone is a brand. I mean, this entire exercise to actually build Indian or have self-sufficiency in terms of Indian brands. I think that might be one of the reasons for the fact. I mean, other issues, of course, the fact that you need to, of course, you might have these companies, but if you try to operationalize or say put in management personnel who are Indians, maybe you can quote unquote Indianize these companies. So I would rather say that the fact that these companies have entrenched themselves, or these brands have entrenched themselves in India, that I think is very difficult to actually get away from. I mean, that's now almost like a fact of life. You can't move out of that. I think the problem is, from what I understand, is the lack of viable Indian alternatives is definitely an issue, and and the fear that, okay, the Chinese seem to be taking over the space. That seems to have that seems to animate concerns in my opinion. I mean, if that could be the short answer. I'm not sure whether I've been able to put it across or provide a very convincing one, but I believe that is what is out there. And I think,
So
okay, maybe one more thing which I wanted to add is, which I missed in the beginning of my presentation, is that we have also, I mean, we study China from various lenses and look at, focused especially for those of us who are looking at Chinese domestic politics and what are their, or how is domestic informing the external the objectives of the Chinese party state, so on and so forth. I think one of the aspects which have been lot understudied are Chinese companies. I mean, the role of the Chinese companies. I mean, the role of, to put it more precisely, the role of the non-state enterprises. So how are they operating, especially now they are all moving outbound investments? How are they operating in different geographies, especially in adversarial geographies like India? Those are somehow do not come or have not been studied much. And in fact, the argument I make in the paper, which for CSEP, is the fact that the understanding of influence also needs to change from the conventional understanding of, okay, it's only military, it's only political. I think some amount of influence is also driven by the operations of these companies, and also how their brands and their marketing strategies in countries like India. So even though in India, maybe the operations of China or influence operations or so on and so forth might be slightly different, but these companies, through their own longevity and through their own phases of evolution and withstanding the turbulence in the bilateral relationship, they are able to generate some kind of influence on the consumer. So that is something which I want to drive up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. So let me now turn to the chat box and see what lies there. So I'm Siddha, is there any question? I think there is
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Bansod who has put a question. Can you read that, please?
Yes, so there are two questions. The first is by Dr. Sanjay Baru. Should I read that
Okay.
one? Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Baru.
He says wide consumer acceptability raises questions about effectiveness of Indian political strategy in dealing with China.
That's, I think, just a comment.
Just a comment, yeah. Rahul Bansod, who is an intern at ICS, says, my question is, with increased focus on localizing production, do you see a trend where Chinese smartphone companies might begin to source more components locally? If so, what would be the potential benefits and challenges?
Uh, to answer that, I think the short answer to that is, at least in the medium to short term, it's not sure. But if the environment is going to be highly unfavorable, so the companies may work out that strategy. That's a good thought, Rahul. But I don't see that happening immediately, because right now the know-how or the tech expertise required to even make those components in India right now is very low. And in the Indian government, I'm not sure that they have given attention to this particular aspect, or even if that attention is being given, that may not happen overnight. So that will take some time. So we are going to see, for at least in the short to medium term, that we are going to rely on uh, the Chinese brands procuring things from China. In fact, I would say that it is still less costly to import things from China compared to actually make those in India. And even for India, for instance, if you to extend that argument, even other markets or other areas like Vietnam, where these are being seen as alternative locations, that it's not at a scale at which it is much more easier to procure them from China. So I don't see that immediately happening. And so even I mean, the second part of the question, I think, is also because the first part is the fact that it's not going to happen in the immediate term. That second part may not actually come into it. Yeah.
There is another question by Mr. Anwar Basha. His question is, will we be able to avoid China fully on processed goods which were sold by other countries but originally manufactured from China?
This is not something I have been dealing with. I mean, this is not something to my area of work right now. But I mean, the loss of commerce is the fact that you find anything manufactured in China anyway. I mean, the Chinese have evolved over the years in terms of the production, but I'm not sure you can actually put barriers on commerce, because economic interests and the laws of economics and commerce do not actually have those kinds of restrictions. Thanks. I think Professor Monty had a question.
May I?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Please go ahead, Manu.
The excellent presentation indeed, Anand. I think your point about Chinese industries abroad being understudied is valid for the current period, perhaps, where it should get more attention. But for the 80s and even 90s, you have a plethora of literature, on China Incorporated, China, because the world was trying to get adjusted to what China was doing at home and abroad. But when, after 2010, when the Chinese economy becomes the second largest economy in the world, and particularly after BRI and that kind of thing, I think the preoccupation has been with more, politics and security aspects of these Chinese exports, Chinese investments, Chinese foreign trade. That is just a reaction. But my question is, what the Chinese did to foreign investors and foreign companies by way of their demands during the 80s, after when they began to get invite foreign capital, foreign investors, particularly with the Europeans and the overseas Chinese investors trying to get technology transfer fast from them, and not so much from the American companies, though they also did follow suit to some extent for a few years, but not always. So, what is your comment on comparing the way the Chinese themselves entertained foreign companies, foreign manufacturers in China for domestic consumption as well as domestic market, as well as more so for the foreign markets, and what the Chinese are doing today in countries like India? How to compare that experience with the present experience?
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure whether I have a very valid answer to this, but I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, if I could refer to, I mean, just the economic survey itself, there are lots of points. I mean, I'm saying this because I am also writing a piece on that. But there is enough space there where Indian policymakers are actually looking at the Chinese experience. In fact, if you just do a word count of the economic survey document, there are 132 references to China. So just look, and this is not just about, I mean, the major focus of the document itself has been looking at Chinese investments and to plug into China's supply chain and all that. But if you read the entire document, it begins by saying about China's development experience in 1978, 1980. I mean, then it goes on. So at various points, the immediate reference point has been about China. Look how China has moved on, or look how China was when we were there. So going back to how India and China kind of started and how China has achieved it till now. I think among the policymakers, there is still a lot of ready references to China. And in fact, that goes to the other point which I keep referring is there is a lot of inspiration being drawn or seek to emulate the Chinese model without necessarily understanding some of the nitty-gritties or some of the other consequences. But there is definitely space, at least there is a push to look at China. In fact, all this greater manufacturing ambitions and all that is, if you look at it very closely, seems to just be going through that Chinese route. I mean, how you want to move forward. I mean, since the Make in India is ultimately, if you read it more closely, it looks like how China has moved out or how it had its FDI policy, it opened out, its open door policy. It's all somehow replicating, or if at least there's a model to emulate that. So that is definitely there. But your other point, I think, requires a little more closer study. So that's maybe I'd like to sort of put it in that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anand, may I, since I cannot see any other question or raised hand, is there a question?
Yeah.
Yes, so there's a follow-up question by Mr. Anwar.
Okay.
He says, in case of Taiwan takeover, naturally there would be an embargo. Then how would Indian telecom companies would be able to source chips? How will be Indian companies be self-reliant?
First of all, I'm not sure that Taiwan takeover is going to happen here immediately. I think these are all hypothetical situations. I do not foresee a takeover, at least in the near to at least in the next few years, at least in the next, if I would say that at least next to 5 to 6 years, definitely that wouldn't be happening because there are a lot of other geopolitical concerns, and China itself has, I mean, its own economy. The Chinese are only trying to now revive. So I would not give credence to the fact about this takeover business. But that question also lies in the fact that you also need to develop your own capacities. I mean, if you are really trying to be an ambitious player and you want to actually have to improve your manufacturing, and you want to actually become, if not an alternative to China, but definitely as another manufacturing powerhouse, then you have to actually develop your own capacities, and that requires more capital, Indian capital, expertise, joint ventures with a lot of players, and especially the Taiwanese are very extremely important. I mean, even if you look at semiconductors, which is not something which I look at, but even the semiconductor agreements which are being signed now left, right, and center, the Taiwanese, there has only been one company. I mean, the Taiwanese are somehow the main proponents of semiconductors and who are the frontal players in it. But you only have one companies who have had an arrangement with Tata's, and that fabrication plant is now being opened in Gujarat. So it's first of all, you have to develop your own capacities. That's one. And secondly, you need to have multiple partnerships, and you have to also find alternatives. So for instance, if the battery is another concern, I mean, solar cells and solar panels, the critical component in all that is lithium batteries. And China almost has 60% dominance of the solar supply chain, and including the battery production. The others are Japanese and Korean. So you have to find alternatives, and through those joint partnerships, you have to build up your own capacities. And I think there is some effort now being put in, at least what it looks like from the CII report on electronics, or even some of the government's own measures. But you need to scale them up by at least 10 times.
So, Anand, let me ask you a follow-up question. You mentioned that the marketing skills of the Chinese companies in penetrating difficult markets which are underdeveloped, in very hostile, difficult conditions, even before Galwan. I mean, it's not easy to create a very large market of a new product in a populous large country with limited infrastructure and so on. And they seem to have done it. They have done it in Africa and so on. So you also mentioned that the Cellular Phone Association has, the Chinese are part of that. They are actively involved in it and so on. So are the Chinese marketing techniques of selling their product under conditions of adversity in difficult markets, have some of these lessons been internalized by other players, by the industry? Have academicians looked at how effective they are, whether they could be used by Indian companies in expansion in Africa or other areas? Has anything of that been done?
Unfortunately, no, sir. I don't have seen it. But let me say that the Chinese, the playbook which they have adopted in India now finds reflection in a lot of other geographies too. So whether it is Africa, whether it is South America, even Central America. So the Transsion Mobile has a big network right now in Mexico. And some of the strategies which the Chinese employed here are being employed, of course, with variations here and there. But they are doing it differently. Pakistan itself, I mean, if you look at it, it's entirely Chinese brands across sectors. And this is again the same way. I mean, so they are, like the Indian case, they have entered into partnerships with the cricket team, with the Pakistan 2020 tournament league. They are sponsoring certain teams, franchisees. And it's far more. I mean, so that visibility of the Chinese are much more there in other geographies too, and they are replicating it, or at least purposing it, repackaging it, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, as I said, I mean, to be with more to the point with what Professor Monty raised, at least in the last 10, 12 years or 14 years, this growth of China, especially BRI, and how the markets have, or the Chinese companies have expanded post that, they have also acquired objectives which are in sync with the Chinese party state. And I think that somehow is now only getting studied now. So unfortunately, it is still very understudied in India, at least in academic spaces also, unfortunately. I mean, so this paper which I was writing, I was interested in over the last at least 5 to 6 years. In fact, one of those conversations I had was way back in 2017 with that Samsung executive. So it is a very slow process. And I think you need to also look at companies also as part of influence building. And I think it's only now that maybe people are looking at it. I mean, one ready-made example I can give you is the crane company or the ZPMC. I mean, it is only getting studied now because those cranes are involved in BRI projects. And even in India, the Vizhinjam port, which was opened in Trivandrum a few months ago, all the cranes are from ZPMC, even though the Indian government claims that those companies will not be engaged, or there is a talk of that. So the role of Chinese companies in how China has expanded itself, or how China's growing ambitions, I think that is something which requires a lot more study, and at least a case by case study. It's not just about only the main narrative or a generalized kind of understanding, but sector wise, specific company wise studies are more needed and need to be encouraged to actually understand behavior or even variances in behavior.
Thank you, Anand. If there are no more questions, then I would like to give Anand another couple of minutes for any final thoughts, and then we can close it with a short comment from me.
So
Are there any questions? Swayam Siddha?
No, sir.
No. Okay. Anand, any closing remarks?
No, I would like only to reiterate that this study was somehow something I had actually been interested to do for a while. Other than my main work on labor relations in India and China, this is something which I am looking at, or have developed an interest in the electronics industry, and which is now seeing more East Asian capital coming in. I mean, equally Chinese, but also Taiwanese. And this requires a lot more study, focus, and attention. The other thing is, what I wish to say is that, yes, this is a very difficult phase for the companies. From whatever conversations I have had with management executives or personnel of the Indian arm of these companies, they are kind of pretty confident that they will outlast this turbulent phase. I mean, the India-China bilateral relationship may not necessarily go back to the normal, but they can continue to work in this new normal because the fact that their products, their services are being sought after by the Indian consumer. Frankly, there is no credible alternative to those brands and to those devices. They are able to cater to a section which is from the price range of 8,000 to say 30,000 rupees. Those are the price range in which these brands are able to operate and provide their devices. And there is a great anticipation among people to also buy them. So, and especially people who are buying their second phones, as I said, are looking more at these companies, and inevitably some of us would be having them. So maybe it is an exaggeration, but the very fact that these devices are being bought itself is a win for these companies, for these brands, and in that way they will continue to survive and ride this turbulent phase and be there in the longevity.
Thank you, Anand. I must really commend you for this very broad 360-degree approach you've taken to studying the smartphone industry from the consumer angle, from the trade chain angle, from the government angle, from the partners angle, and also from the angle of the manufacturers themselves. And what comes through to me is the fact that the Chinese seem to have developed some good skills in conducting business in an environment of adversity. And when I think about it, it is not only India. After all, they have problems, political problems with Japan, with some of the countries of the ASEAN, maritime disputes, and so on. But somehow, even within that climate, they are able to carry on trade, commerce, investment, exports, and commercial relations with all these countries very vigorously. And that gives me a thought that perhaps we in India need to study this because if we are to grow, we need investments. We may get it from all over the world. Some countries may be more friendly disposed, some may not. But from your analysis, I feel there is some room for India itself to do some introspection as to what we need to learn from this case study. May I thank all of you for attending. Anand, particularly to you for a fantastic presentation. And thank you all very much.
Thank you. And thanks once again to ICS for this opportunity.
Thank you. I think we can close the session now.
I think, yeah.
You're muted, Swayam Siddha.
With this, we come to the end of today's seminar. We thank Dr. Anand P. Krishnan and Mr. Ravi Bhutalingam for gracing us with their presence and for giving us their precious time. We also offer our gratitude to the audience for joining us today. The video of today's discussion shall be available on the ICS YouTube channel. We warmly invite everyone to the upcoming Wednesday seminar scheduled for 16th October 2024. Further information regarding the event can be found on the ICS website. You may also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen.